Hello, I'm Henry Reiske with the Center for Alaskan Coastal Studies. Welcome to my presentation, Healthy Oceans, Healthy Community, CoastWalk 2020. I'm going to be talking about our CoastWalk effort from this last year, as well as ways that this CoastWalk might have been changed by COVID-19, as well as how COVID-19 might have affected some of the results from CoastWalk. To get us started, I'm just going to give you a brief introduction to what CoastWalk is. CoastWalk is a community science program that's designed to kind of serve as a snapshot for the environment of Kachemak Bay and track any long-term changes. It's also a chance for us to get out there and clean up beaches, as well as gather data on what kind of marine debris ends up on the beaches of Kachemak Bay. So every fall, people come in and we have the bay divided into 30 different zones here that anybody can check out as an individual. So an individual, say, might check out zone 1 or zone 14 and just go out and clean that zone, bring back their information to us. Or we do this with groups as well. So it could be school groups, which we started working with back in 2002. Or it could just be community cleanups where we allow people to come out, they sign up, and we clean the beach together. Sometimes on this side of the bay, sometimes on the other side of the bay. While we're doing this, we actually gather data with nowadays ICC data sheets, which we started using back in 2001. But this data sheet's changed a little bit over the years, so it's not the exact same data sheet as they were using back in 2001. One thing is that we're really glad that we were able to do this. A lot of programs like this and a lot of these kind of community events were not able to happen last year, but CoastWalk was, and we were able to get out there and clean the beaches. One of the reasons for this is I think actually beach cleanups, as long as they're not really big, which ours were not, are a pretty good environment for staying safe, staying distance, where you can spread out on the beach. People are already wearing gloves. They're already, kind of aware of using hand sanitizer and things like that. And then just with some small modifications, we were actually able to run the program. So things like having people masked, especially during any transportation that we provided when we're a little bit closer together, having, family units or people who live together clean as one, and just being more aware of that sanitation, more aware of using hand sanitizer, more aware of gloves. And then we also had some smaller cleanup sizes. So all of those things combined let us still run this program pretty effectively. Now, for the program, we did see pretty large reductions in our participation overall. So you can see here last year we had 169 volunteers, which is only 39% of the average, like 435 volunteers that we would get per year. But each of these volunteers actually did put in a little more time than our average volunteer has in the past, nearly at about 50% of our max time that people contribute to this program. So 368 this year compared to an average of 750. And then covered more land. So we were able to cover 66.7% of our 10-year average in shoreline miles walked and cleaned. So lower people, but overall each person was spending more time and doing more miles of beach. And this has a fairly straightforward explanation in that we do a lot of school cleanups. And with decreased school participation, we just couldn't recuperate those numbers or those hours. But say if you have, the whole 7th grade here in Homer down at the beach, you're getting a lot of kids, but it might just be a 1-hour cleanup. So that's where some of this increased time and increased coverage comes in per person for the cleanups this year. Alongside people checking things out, we were able to do 5 community events. So we had one at Anchor Point, one at Bishop's Beach, Land's End of the Fishing Lagoon, and then we went across to Glacier Spit as well as Eldred Passage and did beach cleanup. So 3 on this side where community members were able to sign up for it, and then 2 on the other side where we actually provided the transportation and went over to those beaches to clean. I'm just showing you these here. These are our data sheets. And so this is what a volunteer out in the field would have. This one you can see is divided into some simple categories, but as you can see with the one that's filled out over there, that after image, people are allowed to fill in kind of blank areas. We submit all of our data to the International Coastal Cleanup, but we also keep it here. So we're able to track some of those smaller things a little bit better. Another small change that you might see are just right down here. They've added a couple categories this year. So those are the gloves and masks, the PPE category, as well as an e-cig category. The e-cig category has been planned for a while, as they've just seen that amount rising throughout the world, whereas the gloves and masks being added to the data sheet was a direct result of COVID-19, and that being a predicted thing that might increase. So looking at that, we can start to look at our numbers that we actually collected this year. So this year, our volunteers were able to clean up 859.5 pounds of marine debris off the beaches, which is about 41.3% of what we've done over the last 10 years on average. So a decrease, but a decrease that's kind of on par with the number of people that we had coming out this year. The way that I often actually look at this data is not just pure pounds to evaluate if there was more or less out there, but the pounds per person hour. So basically, how much are you getting for your effort? Where we are still below that average, but we're a lot closer. So we have, a 9% reduction in that pound per person hour compared to that big reduction in the overall. So the other thing that we see on here is just one nice thing about CoastWalk is that we're not just collecting the pounds of garbage, we're collecting what's actually out there. So that lets us build an image of like what marine debris is Kachemak Bay actually facing, so that you can address those issues. Gives us these nice convenient top 10 lists. So you can see here some of our top 10: styrofoam, cigarettes, plastic pieces, food wrappers, caps. To people who've been out there on the beach, these might not be a big surprise that they are some of the most common things found. That's just there reminding you we had significantly lower volunteers, but our person hours and volunteer numbers are looking closer on our pounds, whereas the amount cleaned per hour is pretty solid. To get another look at what we're actually finding, because that was something that we thought might change this year. We thought that there might be a little bit different composition and differences in the amounts. We've seen that there's a small difference in the amount of how much we were picking up for our effort, which might suggest that there was less per area to cover, but still a small one. And then here we see that we're seeing a lot of our similar items here. Styrofoam pieces still at the top, and actually a significant increase this year in the number of styrofoam pieces found. Building materials going away, which is actually largely a result of losing the school groups and where they tend to clean up, how they tend to clean up. That we didn't get those, because most of those are actually coming out of fire pits, being nails being found in fire pits. But then getting back to it, cigarette butts, plastic pieces, food wrappers, these kind of same things are showing up here on both lists. It's a little hard to compare directly to each other, these numbers. One way that I've tried to look at it is just to standardize it to the amounts we found in 2020. It's 2022, 2019, so in 2019, we found about 11,500 pieces of debris, whereas this year we're at a little over 9,700. So I was just looking at if we'd found our total amounts of debris, what might these numbers kind of look like? And we see that styrofoam, again, is just way, way higher in this area than on the other side. Building materials still much lower, in fact, not even showing up on our list. Cigarettes start to even out a little bit here, 1,600 to, just under 1,600. So pretty much the same. Food wrappers do go down a little bit. Some of this stuff is going down in proportion to how much is being found, but not a huge amount of change. Here we're just looking at charts, what composed what we're actually finding. Some of the big standout pieces here would be that large increase in styrofoam. Now, this would be hard to explain. It's definitely hard to explain, like in context of COVID. Most of the styrofoam that we're finding is actually from old docks washing up. So this could be occurrences where a large billet washed up on a beach. We happen to find that area where it's kind of getting torn and shredded apart. That can increase the amount a lot just through the nature of styrofoam on a beach. Finding those pockets can change how things are. Cigarettes, approximately the same size. That building material gets way smaller and is essentially made up for actually in the styrofoam, but then we see food wrappers and plastic pieces right there in those early slots as well. So some change, definitely different composition. We actually see caps and lids as well as food wrapper dropping down below that plastic pieces there. So a little bit of change, but mostly pretty similar composition that we're seeing here. So looking at some of the predictions that we're really expecting to see come out of these changes would have been an overall decrease in the amount of debris that we're finding due to lower use of the beaches as well as lowered tourism, and specifically here of consumer goods. Same like those styrofoam from docks or like plastic beaches, which is usually stuff that's actually been out at sea for a while and been torn apart. We weren't predicting to change. We were saying things like wrappers, bottles, those we might expect to change. Expected an increase in PPE, like that data sheet suggests, being masks and gloves. And then we were expecting to kind of see an increase in these single-use items. Single-use sanitation items, single-use foods, takeout containers, things like that. We were actually expecting to see change. But looking back at what we found, and we actually see, yeah, there was kind of a small increase in the overall amount of consumer debris. Seeing that food wrappers go down, seeing some of the bottles go down, it was pretty small. And with our small sample size, we can't say for sure how that was. The increase in PPE, being masks and gloves, again, was a little bit off. Throughout all the sheets, actually only 15 masks were reported being found during these cleanups, and very few gloves were being found during the cleanup. Certainly not outside of our normal range where we're normally seeing some amount of gloves. So we did not get a significant increase in those areas from previous years. And then increase in single-use items. We actually, in some of our information, we're looking at the opposite, where we're looking at a smaller proportion of food wrappers and things like that out there on the beach. So we didn't see that there either. So again, it's hard to tell, especially from just the cleanups that we were able to do, exactly how things changed, but we weren't seeing large changes like we thought might happen last year. In fact, if I clear this out here, I have coming up here a great example of how similar in some ways these cleanups were. In 2018, we did a complete cleanup of this zone down here, our CoastWalk Zone 8, which is from Land's End to the fishing lagoon out on the Spit. And we did that again this year in 2020. 2018, we had 10 volunteers, and it took 3.5 hours, so 35 volunteer hours. This year, we had 12 volunteers. It took 3 hours, so 36 volunteer hours. You can see there the weight's very similar. 86.5 to about 82 pounds cleaned up during that thing. This was just a wild piece that I found when I was going through and looking at the data. They found the exact same number of cigarette butts in 2018 and 2020, 202 during that span. Really the only significant change during this cleanup was so much styrofoam. They found over 1,250 more pieces of styrofoam. And so that's one of those examples of how an event, so styrofoam coming up, could look like an increase in that area. It could just be a pocket, but it's definitely still happening. And so even with some of our other marine debris going down, those are still out there and definitely were not affected by the pandemic, except for potentially being a little bit more, but that'd be hard to explain. Thank you. I'm Henry Reiske. Feel free to reach out to me with any questions or talk about anything that I've had, or to get involved with cleanups this next spring after the end of the summer. Thank you all.